to thank our presenter, Mr. Petoho, for his effort in preparing and giving this presentation. So before we go any further, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules. Firstly, if you do have any questions during the presentation, kindly raise your hand and I will enable your mic. I will then indicate to the presenter, and then you can unmute and ask your question. However, if you're feeling shy, and that's okay, you can chat your question. You can type your question in the chat. I will then alert the presenter to the question, and we will address it. At this time, I would like to ask Mr. Petoho, would you like this to be a more interactive session, or do you prefer the questions at the end of the session?
Oh, I prefer it to be an engaging one, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. I don't mind.
All right.
Okay, perfect. All right, so that is for the questions. Secondly, as you know, the session is recorded. So the recording and the presentation slides will be requested from the presenter. It will then be uploaded to our Moodle community. So just in case you are forgetting the content or you needed clarity on something, you can go to our Moodle communities and go to the workshop and download the resources and re-look at the recording. Finally, we have a feedback survey that I will post in our chat. And this is for you to, we request you that you please fill out the survey. This is for us to gain insight as to whether this workshop was helpful and how we can improve in the future. By filling out the survey, you will also receive a certificate of attendance and also to provide a few kind words to our presenter. So I would just like to speak a little bit about our research capacity development management system. I'm not too sure if you all are aware, but here at the Research Capacity Development, we've launched our management system. So what is it? It is basically a comprehensive platform managed by the RCD unit, and it's to streamline and enhance events, services, and resources for postgraduate students, postdoctoral fellows, staff, and okay, you can access it via two ways. You can go into the RCDMS website directly, or I think an easier way would be to log on to ULink with your UJ credentials. You navigate to the Services tab and then click on RCDMS and register. However, if you're experiencing any issues, you are most welcome to contact us on rcdinquiries@uj.ac.za. Moving swiftly along, I'm now going to introduce our presenter. So our presenter today is Mr. Peter Ho, and he is a researcher in the field of environmental management. He holds a master's degree in environmental management from the University of Johannesburg and recently transitioned into an academic role at the same institution. Prior to this, he gained valuable experience working with the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. He teaches energy politics and energy policy modules while also supervising research students in energy studies. His research interests span energy governance, biodiversity conservation, climate change governance, and the broader environmental governance framework. That is quite a mouthful, if I have to say so myself. Well done to Mr. Petoho for his academic achievements so far. Without further ado, I would like to hand you over to our facilitator today.
Thank you very much for that glowing introduction, and good morning to all of you. Please allow me just a few seconds to share my slides. I believe everyone here is registered as a student at this institution, right? Okay, I would
Um,
like I'll take the silence as a yes.
Yeah, let's do a thumbs up if you're a student.
Thumbs up if you're a student. Are we getting them?
Yes, we are getting thumbs up. Um,
Fantastic.
are, are there any supervisors in the meeting?
Oh, supervisors. Okay, we have one.
Um, I'm going to unmute Gilbert. Gilbert, you can unmute your mic and speak.
Gilbert, are you still with us? He is unmuted.
Okay.
I'm just not so sure why the audio is not coming out.
Okay, Gilbert, if you have a question, maybe you can type it in the chat and we'll address it. And Mr. Petoho, you can take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, as well as inviting me to partake in this initiative. Well, everyone, my name is Petohora Sebechele. I'm from the Department of Geography, Environmental Management, and Energy Studies. I think the name of the department is a bit too long, but okay, here's a question. Oh, that's the evaluation link.
Yes.
Well, I sort of divided this session into two parts. One that deals with research and the other one that deal with the basics of this very workshop, which is on developing sustainable research projects. For starters, just allow me to sort of touch on the basics on, research as a whole. And one thing that I've sort of realized that throughout my time here at the university, I've realized how prestigious the role of a researcher can be. Pretty amazing if you ask me. I think even with just a single publication, you can be considered an expert in your field. But I've somewhat realized that there's often a gap in our understanding of what a researcher is or what a researcher does. It's just more than just publication, but it has to do with the responsibility that we have to the community. So with that being said, let me just share this video that I got on YouTube that sort of delves into the very aspects of what a researcher does. Hoping the audio will come out clearly. Wait, before I resume, I just wanted to check if you guys heard the audio. Is it coming clearly from your side? Just a thumbs up.
Yes, I did hear it.
Thank you very much for that. A show of hand, just bring us your reflection in terms of what you've learned. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. Anyone? Okay, please, guys, don't make this awkward. Anyone? A show of hand? Okay, cool. Not a problem at all. I guess some of us are a bit shy. All right. I think one of my primary takes on this video primarily relates to the question that I've shared on the screen. If there's one thing that I've somewhat learned from being in industry and transitioning to academia is that academics, to a greater extent, they lose touch with reality. Most of our research, not to say that they're not really touching on the problems that we're facing in society, but it kind of seems as if we have all the solutions to some extent, but then nonetheless, we don't really translate them into tangible impacts in our society. So I think that's one thing that we really need to sort of take into consideration, particularly as emerging researchers. To a greater extent, much of the publications that we put out there, for an international audience, they are targeted to other academics who might not necessarily use the research that that we're undertaking. So in a way, who are we sort of prioritizing in this extent? I think some of us that have attended conferences would be aware that, uh, the audience are just other academics who might not have, experience in terms of what you guys are, what you are talking about, or might not necessarily use the recommendations that you have in your paper. I think having come from an industry, you sort of have a different perception as to say research needs to be out there. It needs to be delivered to people who can actually use the recommendations that you have. See, another point, when it comes to the concept of creativity, I think for those who have done their research and probably transitioned to a master's or probably a doctorate would realize that to some extent your creativity or even your very personality gets shifted. You are somewhat killed, for a lack of a better word. Your creativity sort of becomes numb. And I'm not saying it in a bad way, but I'm just saying that you sort of step out of your own skin in order to sort of implement the very recommendations that were raised by your supervisor. So in a way, I think most of us will actually say that, you know what, as emerging researchers, we are sort of becoming our supervisors. Okay. So also, who are we sort of again prioritizing? Are we looking at the people that are funding us? Are we looking into the communities, or are we just publishing for the sake of publishing? And who are we sort of making this research available to? When you put it on an international journal, for instance, are we not also sort of um, creating a barrier between us and the rest of society? So based on what I've said, do we have any question on that? Okay, I see one. Thank you for that. But then again, yeah, imposter syndrome is quite a thing. And I think for those who have done their PhDs or still doing their PhDs, their skills get questioned a lot. Do we have any question on this? Any hand? Any critique? Any remark? Okay, this brings us to a close of our first part in terms of introducing what a researcher does. So I hope that you've learned something from this, and I'm about to delve into the very specifics in terms of developing a sustainable research project. Just give me a sec so that I can just upload the next part. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Any remark? Again, don't make this awkward, please. Okay, if there's no questions or comment on that, let me just delve into the very specifics of this.
Sorry, before you go on, I just have to ask, you did highlight the differences between industry and academia. Could you sort of expand on the advantages and disadvantages at this point?
Hmm. That's a very interesting one. But I would say that it depends on which kind of industry you're talking about because they're all different. But I would just bring into my context. When
Yeah,
you are sort of serving in an industry, there's no structured methodology in terms of doing your activities. But when it comes to academia, you sort of have a way, and there are various tools that you have to apply in order to achieve the various objectives that you've set as part of your research. One thing that most of us have actually been taught as part of our roles in industry is that forget everything that you've learned in academia. This is the real world. I've touched on how um, we sort of, as academics, being critiqued as to say we don't know what's happening in the real world. If you were in government for several years, like I have, or you get to have the, what is it? You get to experience society in terms of what it's about, what the challenges are about. And sitting from an academic standpoint, you don't really get exposed to that in terms of the functioning of society and what exactly it entails, you see. So I think, in my opinion, having those two cabs might sort of serve as an advantage, particularly maybe if you're specializing in whatever field that you've actually served in industry. I hope that was clear enough.
definitely. Yeah, that was quite insightful. I mean, coming from you that was in industry, and I think that has helped you with your academic role currently.
To some extent, I would say yes. In many a times I get asked this question: should I go into academia or should I or should I register
Yes.
for another, qualification going further? And my response to that will always be the same. What is your objective in terms of life? Where do you want to be? Because I get to realize that there are various skills in academia that can also serve in industry. Like I said, in industry, there might not be a structured way of doing things and finding out certain things. If you're in policy development, as an example, you might not necessarily have, methodological ways in terms of finding out what their problems are. But in academia, you have that. So if you bring
Mm,
that to the fort, maybe in the industry that you're serving, then it becomes a lot easier for you to structure it in a way and delivering the objective that you have set. See,
thank
so
you.
yeah, thanks for that.
Okay.
Thank you for that
Okay, so
question.
sorry, there's just another question in the chat. Do you have tips for how to navigate the imposter syndrome, especially for people coming from industry and are now exploring research?
Oh, I've been into 3 years of my PhD, right? And I still have not taken out this. I still don't have a formula for that, to be quite honest. Um, but I think you just have to be willing to learn, being willing to take critique. I strongly believe it's just about emotional intelligence because feedback from a supervisor, especially at PhD level, we are somewhat, what's the word that I'm looking for? We're sort of compelled to know the very thing that we're sort of investigating on. As you look maybe in the prospectus of whatever academic institution, they will tell you that you have to be independent. And in my opinion, I think it's quite the opposite because in many instances, we don't necessarily know what we're doing. Unless if maybe you have a person who is literally holding you by the hand, or maybe if you have studied a similar of undertaking a similar methodology prior maybe to your master's. See, so it's very tricky, and I don't think there's a formula for that. But you learn as you go. I mean, some people take 7 years to accomplish their PhDs or even master's degrees. Some they do it in 3. So the very dynamics in terms of having a supportive structure, being emotionally intelligent, in my opinion, and being willing to take critique, it somewhat molds you to, you know, letting go of yourself in terms of like trying to achieve your research. I hope I've also answered you properly on that one.
I'm sure that was a very comprehensive answer. There's another question in the chat. It says, explain or define academia from your perspective.
I don't really have a clear method, a clear definition or academic definition that relates to that. But in my way, I would sort of give you like bullets in terms of defining that. Teaching and learning, research, stakeholder engagement, informing policy. I think those are the building blocks of what constitutes to an academia. In many instances, depending where you sort of reside and the institution in which you're serving, it's mostly on teaching and learning and research. We do have, community engagements that are part of our KPIs, the key performance areas as academics. But I do feel that the very stakeholder engagement initiatives that we have set might not have a thorough enough reach to sort of make an impact, of which I will be touching on as part of this presentation. So I think as a postgraduate, the emphasis would probably be on research and publication. So those are the building blocks which we sort of get spoon-fed as we undertake our research. Caroline, I hope you're happy with that.
Caroline, if you can respond in the chat. Okay, you got a thumbs up.
Oh, thumbs up.
Thank
Okay, I
you.
did not see that. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions before I
Thank you.
proceed? Any other question? Are we all happy? Okay, cool. All right, coming to the very specifics of developing a sustainable research, then again, I'll start a bit more broadly. I think throughout our lives, I mean, not necessarily to say this very life, but I think throughout time, the world has changed since the re-establishment of the first university, which was in the year 895. We have discovered that the planet wasn't flat. We invented electricity, we developed electric cars, and even created generative AI, of which some of us cannot do without. So, despite all of these breakthroughs, I think we can all agree that we're still faced with problems that we have not yet figured out how to solve them. Whether it's climate change or even the odd behavior of texting and driving, it's clear that the very definition and characteristics of the word problem, in air quotes, can be personal and differ between life experiences and even academic disciplines. Let me touch on one group called or referred to as wicked problems. Now, these are complex issues that seem almost impossible to solve. Unlike a math equation with a straightforward answer, wicked problems like climate change, for instance, or even systematic poverty don't come with easy answers. They're interconnected and often influenced by multiple factors, meaning that what works maybe in one context might not necessarily work out for the other. So, what is our role as an institution? While we may not solve all the problems, our role primarily lies in helping society understand some of our research and education, both in which are embedded in our model right here at the University of Johannesburg. I think at the moment we sort of realize that the university is dedicated to fostering critical thinking, providing tools that are necessary for students as well as communities to grapple with the complex issues that we face in our subjects. But not only that, the university needs to serve as an incubator for innovation and fostering collaboration between academia, industry, government, as well as leading to new products, services, as well as policies. So in a way, Caroline, I hope you somewhat got the very definition or an expansion of that to what is the word academia in my perspective. So when it comes to research projects, or rather sustainable research, it's not just about creating knowledge as highlighted in these papers. It's about embedding knowledge within systems that can actively support real world impact. Pardon me for that. It's not enough to say that, to a researcher to work in isolation. We need institutions that value engagement and provide sustainable funding, and also encourage collaboration across disciplines. In that way, we would say that research does not sit on a shelf, but actually influences policy and practice. So one thing that I would like to ask, just to be a devil's advocate for 1 second, is to say, what happens to the published papers that we often, keep on chasing? One common misconception that theory and practical impact are opposite, but that's not the case. We need to realize that good theory can be the foundation of meaningful change. If it's as developed, to real world impact, then kudos to you. So, based on what I've said, I think there's a need to sort of treat impact, not necessarily not to treat impact as an afterthought, but it needs to be embedded in the various processes that we undertake right from the very beginning. So that means that we need to actively involve people as part of our research development, include policymakers, community, and people in industry. So rather than just publishing papers and presenting at conferences, we should focus on sharing knowledge in ways that truly make a difference. That's how we ensure that our work lives beyond its initial establishment and beyond publication. Any questions on that before I proceed? So anyway, I'm just going to serve as a devil advocate throughout this presentation because I realize that I'll be stepping on toes as I proceed with this. So one thing that I've somewhat realized in my short-lived experience in academia is that not all projects are made the same. Some are more important than others, especially within this context of, challenging the various problems within the context of sustainability. What I would like to believe that everyone puts in their best effort in doing their research. Not all of them are equally important, especially now. See, I often hear the word, especially maybe if a student gets a mark around maybe perhaps 60 or maybe in their 50s or even a fail, and they will tell you, I worked hard for my research, but that's not necessarily good enough. So within this context, we often work hard, but then again, it's not maybe the projects that we're undertaking, they might not necessarily be as impactful, especially, in this context of the problems that we're facing. So while we're not all environmental scientists or even social scientists, the primary question that one should be asking is, what are the long-term impacts of the study that you're undertaking? Are you merely adding to the body of literature, or can your study be used to address a specific problem within your discipline? And just to add insult to injury, when Elon Musk was asked why he didn't finish his PhD, he pointed out that a few theses actually get used to solve real-world problems. So this sort of highlights the need for ensuring that our researchers have tangible impacts and not just researching to publish papers and garner citations. Any questions before I proceed? I've realized that I've insulted probably decades of work, but I do hope that you got something out of this. Okay, we have a hand. Go ahead.
Good morning. It's quite
Morning.
interesting. Yes. Well, I don't know whether it's a question or what, but I'm thinking of research and the extent to which it influence policy makers or change up policy paradigms in our day-to-day life experiences. Because at the end of the day, in my opinion, I think we're having research for research sake, not necessarily publications to influence our policy changes, to influence policy makers and change in our society, especially when we're looking at this environment management system, because we've been having a lot of policy that have been put in place to influence change, to address climate change, to address biodiversity and ecosystem services management. But are we really using that research to influence change in our society, to influence change in our community? Or we are, in theory, having good ideas but failing to implement them? Thank you.
Again, to the last part. I think I lost you there for a bit.
Okay, I was saying at the end of the day, we have a lot of papers, publications, results, but we are not using them to influence change in our society or in our communities. So at the end of the day, we're having research for research sake, not research for influencing change in the community.
I do believe that you're somewhat alluding to the point that I've actually been making, to say that, you know, some research projects don't reach, you know, the very people who can sort of advocate for change. The scientific information might probably be there, but the very systematic issues that are somewhat maybe perhaps get, you know, highlighted in various research papers, they might not necessarily be there. But remember, some problems in society are very systematic, you know, in a way, meaning that one factor that contributes to a problem might not necessarily be as straightforward as we think. You see, so in a way, it just doesn't take research to sort of establish the very change that we need, but it will take probably more than that, you know, not just good governance, but also research that feeds into trying to implement the very change that we're talking about. So it's not really cast in stone, so to speak. So in my opinion, I think having to serve, let's say, for example, in one of the committees that I'm actually serving, which is the National Committee for Science and Technology for Land Degradation and Desertification, we sit with a number of national officials. In some instances, we do get joined by people from academia, but the day-to-day running of, you know, the directorate or the very portfolio that in which is supposed to be, you know, addressed, we somewhat get to realize that we need academics, you know, in terms of addressing the various problems that we have. So there is somewhat a fragmentation between what we do is in academia and what really gets implemented as part of solving the problems that we have. You see, I see there's another one, a comment that has been raised on the chat.
Yes.
So it really depends. It really depends on the projects that people are really undertaking, right? So in some instances, for example, I think if you really scrutinize and go online and check some of the various publications, you might realize that maybe some of the publications don't really address the specific problems that we have in society, right? So it doesn't really mean that I'm sort of discrediting the work that they're doing, but I'm just saying it's very difficult to sort of align it with, you know, the sustainability goals. That's what I'm actually getting into. I would have really loved to hear your voice in terms of this one. You are probably grinding your teeth, but I hope I've answered you on that.
Okay, just to let everybody know, I've allowed all mics, so you can unmute from your side and go ahead with any questions or comments that you do have.
Or maybe if you're shy, you can just post them on the chat box.
Yeah,
But then
that
again,
too.
yeah. All right. I do see guidelines for questions, but please advise on how do we reach that input. Okay, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. All right. Okay, did I just jump a slide? Okay, cool. So based on what we have just, you know, discussed, I think we already have an idea in terms of what a sustainable research project is. And just to just to sort of put that to practice, I would like for you guys to sort of pitch a sustainable research project. Hopefully you're not scared. We'll just give you a few minutes or so to sort of come up with an idea in terms of, you know, various projects probably that you might have undertaken or an idea that you have. So anyway, I call this the think pair share. You think of a project that you deem as being sustainable, and then we'll get others to share their perspective on whether they think it's sustainable or not. Are we happy with that? I hope you guys will agree so that we don't make this awkward. Happy? It doesn't have to be all of us, it can be just a few people that are really interested in participating. And then, in a way, I think the audience can get to share what they think about the idea. Because one thing that I've come to realize that the word impact is philosophical and it's also personal. Like we've indicated at the very beginning of this, I don't want to say lecture, but this talk. So, like I said, the word problem can be different. If, for example, you're living in the suburbs, uh, you might have a different problem. You might have various problems that you're facing, but they may not be the same magnitude as someone who's probably living in the rural area. Because we've realized that, if you are living in a township and then you don't really have electricity for 2 hours, you might consider it as being, a disaster. But someone in the township didn't have electricity for 6 months. Maybe to them, that's a disaster. So please, just by show of hand, if you would like to participate, or maybe just a thumbs up. Are we getting them, or maybe just skip?
We are getting the thumbs up.
We are getting some thumbs up. Okay, I think maybe we
Yes.
can give them like how many minutes do you think would be suitable for this?
I think
Would
2.
Okay, cool. Right. Then after some seconds, and then everyone will get to share their opinions on
Yes.
this. I see some questions are popping by. Let me just have a look at them, and then I
Yes.
think we'll address them shortly.
Okay, there are all right. Okay, there are two questions in the chat, but you can decide which is how you're gonna address them.
Okay, let's see. The first question is the impact of VR or what's VR? Tlhokomelang?
Thank you, Chair. It's visual reality and augmented reality. It's usually used to, um, like at the initiation of projects, you can use the applications or the technology to showcase a full project. How is it gonna look like? How is it gonna operate once it's completed?
Oh, okay, I see. So the impact of that on stakeholder engagement in project management. That's a very interesting one. I think it would depend on the people that the project is intended for. So in a way, let's say, for example, you are establishing a project somewhere in, a rural area. So what kind of stakeholders do you think would be able to participate in that? In my opinion, I don't think that there would be many, considering that there are limitations with regards to this. Yes, maybe they might work for a particular setting, maybe people who have internet connectivity or people who have the resources to sort of participate in the virtual reality. But if you are somewhere, maybe in Rietfontein, somewhere in the Northern Cape, as a typical example, you might not have the broader reach. Internet is a mess. Electricity might not be there, and also considering that it's very hot, so those are the things that we really need to take into consideration when it comes to such. That is why in project management and there's a thing called, if you're working in government, there's a thing called stakeholder needs assessment. So you somewhat check what the people need. And also, one of the things that you would have put in that particular assessment is to check the limitations of the very project that you're trying to establish. So, in a way, traditional ways of relaying your message and engaging stakeholders might not seem that bad. Having your indaba, having your imbizo, having your community meetings, they might not be that bad if you are considering a project that targets marginalized groups. I think I've said too much. I hope you're happy, Kakumelang.
I am. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
The other question, another
Yes.
one would be like, what extent did colonialism lead to gender equality? Whew. Okay, I'm not a specialist on that one. I'm not a specialist on that one. Really, it's very tricky. I'm not a specialist on that one, but I think maybe there are people in this room that might want to take a step on that, because if I were to take an attempt in terms of addressing that question, I might sort of stem out or spiral out of the current discourse or academic conversations that have been held within this context. Victoria, my apologies on that one, but I think colonialism did really have systematic impacts on our society. Some of these impacts are still felt even today. But then again, the problems that were somewhat created by colonialism and the discrimination, they added to systematic problems and governance issues that we are currently facing even today. See, so the current problems are sort of compounding to colonialism and the impact that it has on society. See, so the issues of corruption, issues of marginalization of women, it's still there, and youth as well. So I know for a mere fact that the issue of 35, of reaching 35 somewhat excludes you from getting certain services in government is one hot topic at the moment. So it's not just that, but it's also other issues and also other problems that we're currently faced with even today. We often blame
Okay.
it, yeah, with good reason. But then again, we also have other problems that we need to be addressing in society.
Yes, I see Victoria responded in the chat saying, it's all right. I just wanted to know if it is sustainable.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, I see. Mm, just let me know if I've exhausted the 2 minutes, if everyone is just ready. We just maybe need 2 or 3 people to sort of share their insight, and then we just leave it to the floor to someone come or critique or judge whether, not necessarily judge, not to make it seem bad, but to give their feel on what they think is sustainable with regards to the research ideas that we would pitch.
Okay, I see that there's another question here by Angelina saying, is helping people have better food packaging a sustainable research?
Is helping people? Let me see that.
Is so better food packaging.
What do you mean by food packaging? Is it like the way in which we wrap our food? Is it
Food packaging has apparently been said to have like these chemicals that are not good in it. So the research is like trying to remove those compounds from the food packaging. Remember that food stays for a long time in whatever it is stored up in.
I
So
see.
eventually it leads to like diseases as such as cancer and stuff like that. So now we are trying to remove those compounds from the packaging material.
All the so-called forever chemicals that you get in, in some of these products we often purchase. So I think one part that you've highlighted on actually speaks to some of the sustainable development goals that we have, in which they serve as, a framework for achieving sustainability. So yes, to answer your question, it might be addressing a specific sustainable or sub-goal of the SDGs, known as the Sustainable Development Goals. But we're going to touch on that a bit later on. So, for example,
Okay.
if you are using a a product that somewhat degrades over time, then it might be considered, to be sustainable in a way, because it degrades and it does not necessarily harm the environment to that extent. And also, it might also be contributing to longevity, because as we consume these chemicals, they somewhat bioaccumulate in their body and can lead to various diseases like cancer, as you have mentioned. So they might touch on one aspect, but not necessarily all of them. So remember, I think one thing that we often taught when it comes to developing research is that you're not trying to address all the world's problems. You must just identify a niche, right? And then work on that. So it does add to that. I see we have a hand
Yes.
from Gilbert.
Yes. Gilbert, there's two questions before Gilbert.
Okay.
So there's two questions in the chat. One from Michael saying, would we say that the source of funding or the institutions commissioning the research determines the potential impact?
In a way it does. In a way it does, depending on what you want to undertake. Some of us, we sort of look for research projects that don't really need much funding because we are aware of the implications of not having good funding. So I somewhat believe that to some extent, yes, it might hinder you from potentially taking a project that you would have deemed to have real impact. For example, maybe if you're living somewhere in, like here, maybe in Gauteng, you want to undertake a research somewhere in the Eastern Cape as a typical example, or Northern Cape, some communities that are marginalized. You might not have the resources to actually reach those areas to undertake your research. So depending on what you really want to undertake as part of your research, I think that what really constitutes to being sustainable in a way. I hope you're okay,
Okay,
Michael, with
thank
that. Okay, I think we have another one before we go to Gilbert.
Yes, I think Caroline, this is more for comment. She says, my future research interest is on how Companies Act, King Report, and Black Empowerment Act can be leveraged to foster economic development, attract global investment, sustainability, and future growth in South Africa.
Okay, let me just pardon me for that. My whole phone was ringing. I think this is actually one of the current conversations that we're currently having to say, like, is the BEE achieving its intended objectives? And see, uh, I think that one is a bit more political in a way. Academics, they often, especially within the sciences, they try to shy away from politics. But it is really I think it's a really good research, just to see whether we are achieving our intended socio-economic agendas. I'm just wondering if there's ever been a study that's actually been conducted to look at the effectiveness of BEE in this context. Well, but I think you are onto something, and it'll be very lovely to see what you come up with. Thank you for that, Caroline.
Definitely. Gilbert, you can now go ahead. Gilbert. Gilbert, you can unmute and
I
ask
think
your
he is on
question.
mute. unmuted. I think he is unmuted. Just that his audio is not coming out.
Okay. All right, Gilbert, maybe you can type in the chat. All right. I think we can go on. I'll monitor the chat for Gilbert's comment or question, and then you can go on with the presentation.
All right then. Thank you so much for that. Our people, are they ready? Those that have participated in this Think Pay Share initiative. I think Caroline did somewhat raise her research and proposed one. I think we somewhat leave it to the floor to judge on whether they think it's sustainable or not. I've given my own input on this one. I think if other people would like to somewhat participate in this, they're more than welcome to do so. By show of hand, just give your own opinion on what you think about Caroline's research. I hope you're not the only one who could participate in this, Caroline. I would love to hear from a diversity of people and the various projects that they would possibly undertake, maybe in future.
Okay, so you can unmute your mic. All right, I
Victoria
see
said, I
Angela.
participate. I see Victoria says she participated too. All right, then.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. May I comment on Caroline's research interest? It sounds interesting, but somehow, I don't know, it's a bit too broad for my understanding. I'm looking at these policies or the acts and economic development, of which economic development on its own is a very broad topic. Then to include global investment can be a standalone area of study on its own, then sustainability and future growth in South Africa. So I think it needs to be narrowed down to at least one or two at the end of the day, or at the end of the research rather. All these other three aspects will come out as part of the research results. I'm not sure if I'm clear on that aspect, but somehow it sounds too broad. It's very interesting. It has quite a lot of things, but too broad for my liking. Thank you.
I'm going to comment on Cheetah's comment, right? If that's even a thing. I'm going to comment on that as well. But thank you for that remark. Do we have anyone else who wants to raise a comment on this? I can't see from my end. Do we have any participants? Maybe just unmute and mute.
Yeah, they can go ahead. I've enabled all mics. And I haven't seen anything in the chat. So anybody, somebody.
I have to agree with Angela's comment that the research seems like broad, although it does also seem like as a sustainable like a research project, but like Caroline might struggle, like I don't know if this is PhD or master's level, or I don't know the level, but depending on what depending on the outcomes that she wants to get from this research topic, maybe if she's aiming at like publishing more papers, if that's like her goal, maybe she wants to get like 3 or 4 publications out of this topic, then yeah, she can go ahead. But if it's just like to just do a degree and finish, I think she's just going like I recently learned about parallel reading and reading like and having a project that focuses like on like a certain aspect than just generally trying to solve everything. So yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
so much. Can we maybe hear from Caroline? Caroline, do you wanna maybe unmute?
So Caroline, don't be shy. I believe the people also got feedback from their supervisors, and maybe that's why they are hanging up on you like this. But really, guys, I think you guys raised very valid input when it comes to this. Um, well, she says I'm unable to speak at the moment.
We've scared Caroline away.
Wow. Why did you scare Caroline away? But on just the very basics of a research, I think any other research is that it needs to be smart, not in a sense of being intelligent or genius level, but smart isn't like an acronym. That means it has to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So those are the building blocks of, or I'd say rather the principles of what constitute like to any other research project. So the aims that you probably would have developed, they would need to be smart in a way. Looking into in terms of like what data sources that you're going to set. When are you going to do that? Are you going to do them within a space of 1 year, maybe as a part of your honors research project, or maybe 2 years? I think those would sort of constitute to, the aim and the objective that you'd have set, and overall the achievability. Let's see. But in my opinion, I think Caroline raised a very important and really very relevant research topic that somewhat speaks to the very policies that has been established, that have been debated over time. And at this point in time, it's just a matter of trying to figure out whether it's been working or not. So I do see it having a potential to somewhat inform maybe new policies or revising the policies that have been established. I think you would hear from the news, people keep on talking about maybe having benefited an X number of people. So I think the topic in itself would be relevant maybe to that extent. Of course, I do agree with Chedza and I forgot the other lady's name, but I do think they would inform policies and they would somewhat have an impact. Maybe it might be on a specific SDG, but we'll touch a bit on that a bit later on. So don't feel bad, Caroline. You do have a very important project. So in a way, finding a niche, maybe within the context of sustainability or within the Sustainable Development Goals framework, it might also help you. I think, to be quite honest with you, I think we're all, I wouldn't say victims, but I think we have all come up with very broad research ideas, in my opinion. And we only got to realize maybe down the line to say that this is big. I cannot really do this. So that's some of the things that we really need to take into consideration in terms of, achieving our goal within a specific, amount of time. So time is
Yeah,
also a limiting factor.
I agree with you on that point. Speaking from personal experience, I'm currently writing up my PhD thesis. I'm in the chemistry department, and I think we often are quite ambitious at the start of the project. Uh, but what
Most definitely,
happens,
yeah.
you want to solve all the problems. Um, but what happens is like you just mentioned, you start running out of time. That becomes problematic.
Yeah, hey. And I think imposter syndrome actually kicks in later to say, what have I done? Like, what have I done to myself? And you sort of get to defend the objective that you've established with your supervisor. Maybe if you've just graduated or recently graduated, you feel like, I might be good enough, you just scrape through this PhD or this master's research, only to find out that later, wasn't really that great of an idea, So
Definitely.
having very specific, but really, like I said, the word impactful sustainability might be very subjective depending on where you're coming from. But you must really think within the confines of your area to say what really constitutes to being sustainable, what constitutes as being impactful, particularly in your field. See, so I think we had one. Am I pronouncing Angelina? Do you want us to look into your project? I think others, and Caroline, I think maybe you would also want to raise comments on this one, is helping people have better food packaging, sustainable research. Is that part of your contribution, Angelina?
I don't understand contribution how.
No, in terms of this very activity that we're currently undertaking, to say have idea, doesn't have to be a good one, doesn't have to be PhD level or masters, or just an idea.
An idea of what the research is all about.
Yes, so you said is helping people have better food packaging and sustainable research. So I just wanted to hear from the floor whether they would, if that was if that was part of your contribution, and whether the floor would think that it is or not. Like, just really depends.
Yeah, I was asking to hear the flaws, like ideas.
All right.
Okay. Can I ask, from what aspect are you looking at the project? Will you be developing a new packaging, or how are you going about it?
Okay, so I'm just creating a solvent that tries to minimize those compounds when they are now doing like food packaging. So like I'm creating a device that quality control and who's like the people that develop food packaging can use in order to minimize that compound in when they are making their food packaging.
Oh, I see. I see. Um, I see. I'm actually laughing because I think I'm also a victim of this critique and being a hypocrite. Because my background is environmental management, and nature conservation. So I think we know that plastic is bad, like throughout, particularly when it comes to the processing, the compound that it releases on the environment, microplastics that get, absorbed in the environment and also in the human body, and they end up in landfills, like if they're not recycled, right? But there's a part of me that somewhat thinks that like maybe it might not necessarily be that bad. And reason being paper straws. We know how paper straws are, right? And knowing how paper straws are, you somewhat become a hypocrite to say, okay, I know the impact that this thing has on the environment, but I somewhat prefer this instead of that. So that was just my take on that. So okay, before I raise my comments, I'd like just let anyone take a step on it if they would like to, because I see we're somewhat going to run out of time. If anyone would like to contribute to this, but I think I've given people an idea to say like how can this somewhat be impactful, if it is, based on your opinion.
Okay, I have one question to Angelina. So what is currently in place in terms of the device to minimize the compounds in the plastic? Like what is currently wrong and where is the gap for your innovation?
Okay, so in other developed countries like Europe and USA, they have like instruments that are able to remove like these compounds from food packaging, but it's like still new. But these methods are like expensive for developing countries like us here. So what I'm trying to do is to build a device that will be cheap for us to use, and in order for us to be able to use those rules, like the regulation exists in developed countries, not in developing countries, because we lack the instrumentation. So, what I'm trying to do is to build a device which can be cheap and accessible so that we also can have like good food packaging.
That's brilliant. I think to add on to this, obviously will be a different research project, but um, basically, uh, when you go to buy milk, if we had like a color indicator to say that it's close to expiry, because sometimes the expiry dates are just for show, I would think. But it's just me thinking out loud, and just trying to input to Angelina's project.
And I think you also really, I think this one is a webinar on its own, one of which I really, really support. Because when it comes to sustainable packaging, there are various things that we often take for granted, and certain things are not really taken into consideration. Basic example, you go into ShopRite or Checkers or even Woolies, and then the packaging says can be recycled, right? Cool. Maybe the packaging in itself might be made of recyclable materials or recycled materials. But if you buy that and you go on somewhere into the township, we don't really have facilities for, recycling or even proper recycle. I mean, or even proper facilities that would somewhat feed into what is known as the circular economy. See, so it somewhat defeats the purpose of what is actually in there as part of the sustainable packaging. So there are various elements that we would need to take into consideration. Yes, the packaging maybe might be sustainable, maybe not really um, release harmful chemicals, a typical example. Maybe it might be economic, but there's the other end that we somewhat don't often take into consideration. Maybe it might be the environment. Because if you buy, for example, that Coca-Cola that can be recycled, I think, then you would probably discard it and it would end up at the landfill, which takes up space. And municipalities have been complaining that they're running out of space. So these are the things and the complexities around various initiatives that we consider to be sustainable. But like we've been saying, research needs to be specific. We're not trying to cure cancer. We're not trying to, end all the world's problem from just one publication or from just one engagement. But we're saying, well, as part of this webinars initiative is to have something that will feed into those initiatives to say, yeah, we're ticking one box. Might not all of them, but we're actually ticking one box. And from that, we are able to sort of identify other problems that we can possibly investigate at a later stage that will also feed into, sustainability. Okay, now I think I've become a preacher now. Okay. Is everyone okay? I think if you have any questions, I can proceed. I think we're only left with like 30 minutes or so. Then if we don't have a question or any other contribution, we can proceed. Do we have a hand, a comment?
No, we're just getting thumbs up. So I think
Okay.
you safe to. Oh, just hold on.
All right.
Um, Car Caroline, I believe there's limited research assessing the integration of the three acts and whether they effectively drive long-term sustainability or merely act as compliance mechanisms for enterprises.
Okay, all right. If there is limited, and you're able to justify that through, let's say, your readings that you've done to say this has not been done, then that is good justification. It's a gap, right? We don't know what these acts or these policies and how they're actually feeding into sustainability. But remember, this is one part of sustainability, or this is just a fragment of um what you potentially want to touch on. Could be social, it could be economic, right? So if there is, then you're able to justify that, but it needs to be specific, not too broad. Otherwise, you'll find yourself, yeah, don't want to say the word, but you will find yourself being stuck here for a very long time because of the ambition that you somewhat have when it comes to the scope. But obviously, you will be under guidance of a supervisor, and then you would be able to refine your project even further. And you know, one thing that I've also realized that you are able to trim certain aspects of your research as you proceed, maybe depending on the scope that you would have. So if it is the gap that you've identified, then kudos to you. Then maybe you might have a workable project. I think we have another one. This
I think
is
that's, yeah, more of a comment.
okay.
Yeah, as
Oh,
someone doing her first research project and struggling to decide on the research topic, I love this.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tlokomela. Really appreciate it. Okay. We are somewhat going to repeat some of the stuff that we've said, because I think some of you were somewhat ahead, but not a problem. But I think from our standpoint and what we currently have in mind is somewhat an understanding to say that sustainable research projects go beyond merely creating knowledge. They aim to create lasting and positive change by addressing root causes and real world challenges. So these projects are designed to have long-term impact in mind, ensuring that they remain relevant and ethically sound. So their importance lies in their ability to inform evidence-based policy making and also understanding and contributing to societal well-being. So whether it's changing the public's opinion, improving systems, enriching cultural lives, sustainable research has the power to have tangible impact on our society. We can use the sustainable goals as part of our framework, perhaps if you want to develop a research project. Nonetheless, we have two types of impact that have somewhat identified in literature in terms of around sustainability. One relates to academic impact, and the other relates to socio-economic impact. But really, when we are talking about research impact, we're really asking, what difference does a project make? I think that is the key question we should be asking. So when it comes to academic impact, it's about a research that contributes to knowledge within a specific field. It's not just about publication, but it's about advancing theories, methods, and understanding a way in which we can shape future research. Pardon me. So think about a groundbreaking new methodology, maybe in sociology, or an innovative technology that somewhat emerged maybe as part of your degree in engineering or even physics. So academic impact is not necessarily just about an academic exercise, but it needs to change our approach to specific problems, and it really needs us to really think carefully about the impact that we're having, particularly within the academic space. I think this is primarily where most academics are often sit in terms of trying to come up with frameworks that would somewhat feed into the academic discourse. So when it comes to socio-economic impact, this one I think is a bit different because everyone wants to create an impact. I mean, a project that is impactful. So when it comes to this, it really is about somewhat reaching a socio-economic goal, to be, to put it bluntly. It's about applying the insights that would benefit the people in communities. So think about, a public health initiative that is intended to reduce disease rates, or a technology that boosts, job opportunities and economic growth. This kind of impact shows the value of research beyond the academic bubble. So you can publish a paper with very interesting insights, and then you can put it online. But it's not really just about that. It really needs to extend beyond that. It does not really stop where you sort of say, yeah, I've published my paper at an international journal. So the goal is to make sure that our research does not sit in a shelf, but it really needs to be used to shape minds and change lives. Okay, I saw Gilbert posted something.
Yes. So Gilbert asked in the chat, what are the essential building blocks necessary for developing effective, sustainable research projects, and how do they contribute to the overall societal and economic impact?
I think we're somewhat touching, Benson, we're touching on this, on your question bit by bit. So I think overall we'll be able to sum it up to say what are the building blocks that, that contribute to a sustainable research project. We are touching it bit by bit. So it's a bit of a loaded question, but thank you so much, Gilbert, for raising that question. So I think we have somewhat established that research impact goes beyond just academia. But let's think about it. Let's push this idea even further. What if we stopped viewing academia and society as being separate boxes? So in a way, we somewhat need to think of them as being interconnected, and they really need to influence each other in this context. So as we have mentioned, uh, when it comes to academic impact, it's just not about publications and citations. It's about a ripple effect of our ideas, the new questions they generate, the intellectual movement they somewhat inspire. How can we now design our research to be more than just an add to the body of literature? How can it reshape the very landscape? So I think within the context of social economic impact, we also have cultural impact. So when we really talk about cultural impact, we are talking about, literature or research that actively shapes culture, challenges certain norms, and it fosters empathy and also contributes to a just movement. So one critical question that will somewhat come in mind is how is our research serving as a catalyst for cultural evolution and also driving positive change? So since we have also covered some aspects of what really goes into the various subtypes of an impactful or sustainable research, I think it's really important to also emphasize that it's not always that you get to have a research project that somewhat touches on all of them. Like I've mentioned, maybe we'll probably look into maybe academic impact, given maybe the experience that you would want to have. And really, I somewhat believe that the kind of research would mostly be shaped by the background that you have. If maybe you're in a township, let's say in Alexandra as a typical example, you're exposed to the problems, the infrastructure, the waste management issues, maybe possibly the disease caused by the waste. you might come up with innovative ideas or an innovative research that will possibly touch into the environmental side of things, or maybe also even academia. So it's not always that you'd have a research project that somewhat touches everything and everywhere all at the same time. So next one. So I think we did, sorry about that. So I think we did touch on what sustainable development goals are. So a group of people, mostly politicians, they came together and established 17 goals that are adopted by the United Nations. They are the blueprint for achieving a better and more sustainable future for everyone. So these include aspects like no poverty. Okay, they're not really clear, but I think if you look at them at your screen, you'll probably see a bigger picture, literally. So we have like zero poverty, no hunger, quality education, gender equality. So these are basically the basics of what would contribute to sustainability. They are a blueprint for achieving a better and more sustainable future for everyone. So in a way, kind of think of them as a to-do list for the planet, covering everything from ending poverty, no hunger, to tackling climate change, as well as promoting equality. Now imagine this image sort of what helps us to visualize these goals are more categorized. That will be the picture on the right side of your screen. You will see that these goals are somewhat grouped together in a way to somewhat help us to understand how connected they are. And let's be frank, we know that in many instances, poverty is often associated with economic growth. If there's poverty, maybe in a particular setting, chances are that clean water and sanitation might not necessarily be there. There might be poor air quality, there might be poor infrastructure. You might be impacted by climate change to a greater extent as opposed to people that are maybe more affluent in a way. So maybe let's touch on maybe one that really speaks to the natural environment, because this category focuses on our planet and also our health. So maybe relates to aspects such as clean energy, responsible consumption, protecting life. See, because the planet, especially a more natural one, does provide ecosystem services that benefit us as humans. Let's look at health and human security. So this area addresses the well-being of people, encompassing goals like good health, access to clean water, sanitation, peace, and inclusivity. And then coming to creativity and social innovation, I'm actually laughing because I've come to realize that academics, they are always right. They're very creative in a sense that maybe in some instances the creativity might be squashed because of we're trying to be productive in an academic sense. But this category highlights the importance of building a better world, including quality education, innovation, sustainable cities and communities. Um, I think for some of us that have been watching the news, I think pre-COVID would allude to saying that we've been waiting for a smart city as South Africans for a very long time and we still haven't gotten one. So finally, social justice and development. This one focuses on fairness and equality with goals like no poverty, zero hunger, um, gender equality, decent work, and reducing inequality. So why is this important for sustainable research? Well, I think it's pretty clear because of these goals, they provide a framework for sustainable research projects and they make a real world difference. So by addressing your projects with these goals can help you ensure that your research contributes to solving global problems. It also helps you to communicate the importance of your research to others, like funders, as a typical example, policymakers who are increasingly focused on achieving these goals. Because really, I mean, I think if you were a funder, you really want to know what kind of impacts this will have on the people, and especially if you are the government, as a typical example. So essentially, these sustainable development goals offer a roadmap to, creating a research in a way that truly matters. I'm not advocating for impactful research. I realize our differences as being humans and what we consider as being important or as a problem, like I've alluded during the first few minutes of this presentation, to say that it's different. It's based on your personality, based on your background, and also based on your academic, progress as well. So, we would come to realize that, research does not happen in a vacuum. It requires us to share our research and get into the hands of things in terms of the people that we are trying to somewhat influence as part of our research. So this slide shows some journals that focus on environmental sustainability. So this somewhat serves as a reminder that there are many vacuums for dissemination. So this is just not about publishing your dissertation into the UJ website, but you can somewhat convert your your research into a publication and then put it out there for the rest of, the academic cohorts out there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to stop there, because I have mentioned out at first that academic journals will somewhat maybe have a specific niche of people that it might somewhat attract. In this case, it would mostly be academics, see, who might cite your work and might not necessarily have much resources to actually apply the recommendations that you have. But then again, it also depends on your field of work. So I think we would come to realize at this point that, well, the key point about sustainable research is it's not just about results, but it's about the whole process. And just to play devil's advocate here, this paper says that researchers often lack the basic principles for responsible research, like anticipation, inclusion, reflexibility, and even responsiveness. So it urges researchers to somewhat think ahead, involve people, not just your supervisor, and also respond to concerns. So ultimately, it advocates for a shift beyond the narrow focus on academic advancement towards a holistic approach that prioritizes social, economic, as well as environmental needs. Don't worry, guys. The slides will be shared so that you can have a feel in terms of what has been put out there. So, coming to my second discussion point, or is it the third? Don't remember. So, in a world of ChatGPT, a typical example, we have realized that technology is advancing, but how can we somewhat ensure that our research not only drives innovation, but it also addresses the needs and concerns of marginalized communities? I mean, someone maybe out there in the world probably doesn't know what ChatGPT is, but you being here get to realize what ChatGPT is. So, how can we bring that to the fore? Because let me just be honest with you. One thing that I've come to realize is that there are certain gray areas, especially with the advancement of technology. For example, you'll realize that, okay, maybe in certain areas, there might be a specific boom when it comes to technological advancement as opposed to others. But that would also have impacts, and in some instances, not just impacts within the academic space, but also on the environmental space. Because I also read somewhere, or was it a document that I watched? Can't remember clearly, where they say technologies like ChatGPT They have large data centers that require space. They need large cooling systems that would somewhat consume electricity. And we know that electricity generation at the current moment is largely reliant on coal. It also contributes to climate change. And also these cooling centers, they use large quantities of water. So that somewhat also impacts water security. So just to reiterate the question, how can we share? How can we ensure that our research not only addresses innovation, but also addresses, I'll say, the current needs, especially of marginalized communities? Do we have a hand? Anyone wants to take a stab at this?
You can also put your thoughts, comments, questions in the chat.
Or maybe perhaps we should just skip this one, hey?
Maybe they're still thinking. It's quite the question. So it requires a lot of thinking. Maybe they're still thinking, and then they will pop um their comments in the chat. I'll monitor that, and then you can move on. I'll monitor the chat
Oh,
for you.
all right then. Thanks for that.
Okay.
So the question is how? Okay, now I lost my train of thought. I think we've somewhat touched on the basics of what really is a sustainable research project. So the question is, how do we actually develop one? So there's a specific framework that I actually come across that somewhat considers impact and sustainability as being synonym. What's the word? As being in sync. So you cannot really have impact without sustainability. So the research in this instance, it's not just about collecting data or publishing papers, it's about creating change. So if your research does not lead to meaningful action, then some people would somewhat question to say, so what? So the research needs to be clear. It needs to have a clear purpose. What problem are you solving? And also needs to engage the right people. Who and what or why um, should people take into your research into consideration? And it also is important to somewhat plan and turn your ideas into action. Resources like funding, time, as well as collaboration also play a factor. But like I keep on saying, it does not really end once your paper has been published. To be truly sustainable, it needs to take constant reflection and adaptation. So part of this framework, particularly when it relates to creating impact, it starts by asking questions like, what are the real issues are you targeting? Where does it come from? Like the issue in itself. Maybe it's a lack of clean water, gaps in education, or something is wrong with the health system that leaves people behind. So understanding the root cause is the first step towards making real change. Next, you need to really think big. What are your ultimate goals, which probably feed into your objective? Are you aiming to improve access, change policies, or probably shift mindsets? But these impacts are not just about the bigger picture, but it's also about small wins, well, in a way. So perhaps maybe from your research might stem a new training program that boosts student test scores, or maybe it might lead to the establishment of food initiatives. So we haven't had problems, I mean, not problems, questions, right? Relating to the previous question that I posed.
No, there isn't anything on the chat. Do you want to pause here, maybe give somebody an opportunity to speak?
Yeah, we can do so. Not a problem at all.
If there are any questions or comments, it would be nice to hear your voices. Anybody wants to
Yeah,
say anything?
I've been talking for a while now. I think people would want to would want to talk.
But I just want to, this is a bit on the side. I just want to say that so far, this presentation has been extremely comprehensive and insightful. And to me specifically, I'm sure to everybody, but to me, from being in the chemistry department, it really sort of opens one's mind up to the other research that's going on in different departments and how, going forward, maybe how to integrate or how to do some collaboration, cross disciplinary collaboration, because for me, this is extremely interesting.
Oh, thank you so much for that very glowing review on the presentation. I really appreciate it. I didn't think it
No
was
worries.
didn't think it was good enough because it was just, imposter syndrome somehow took a toll on me. But
No, it's absolutely fantastic, in my opinion. So, anybody comments, questions, thoughts, anything? Are you guys alive out there?
yeah, I'll probably be muted and went to make breakfast. Guys, please.
Sorry,
Okay,
we're
okay.
still here. Yeah, we're still here. It's only that when you get such a deep knowledge, at times it's difficult to come up with questions, relevant questions to ask, because you don't know where to start. But maybe to answer how do we make research more people-centered, is it? The last
Yeah.
question that we had asked.
Yes, let me just go back to the question. But I
Okay.
see Caroline said she's against ChatGPT. No emphasis.
Okay. Oh yeah. How do we ensure that our research does not only drive innovation but also addresses the needs and concerns of marginalized communities? Now, I'm thinking of when creating our when identifying our research gaps rather, that it has to start from the bottom before we get to maybe the policies and the innovation part of it. What are the communities, how are the communities affected in that area of our study? Okay, I'll give an example of what I'm looking at. I'm looking at environmental injustices in peri-urban areas of Bulawayo, that is in Zimbabwe, PhD study. So my interest is in understanding the unfair distribution of natural resources and the impacts that that unfair distribution has on the communities. So the first step is to identify how these communities are affected. Definitely, if I understand the root cause, I'll be able to come up with results that address the needs of these communities before I even go to the innovation part of it. So basically, that's what I want to contribute, that when we identify our research gaps, let's try to start from the bottom. Like you said, a stakeholder analysis. Where do I want to research? How do I want to get communities involved in my research? And how are these communities affected? Then you build it from there. Yeah, that's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And just to add on what you've mentioned, I think we know that most of the technology comes from the developed world, right? Like your United States is a typical example, which is like the hub for technological innovation. They have different problems than us here, in a developing nation like South Africa. So it's somewhat, I would say, premature for us to have drastic innovation that would somewhat exclude certain people, maybe of certain classes. Because I think it has been portrayed like all over the news to say that South Africa is probably one of the most unequal countries in the world because we have people in different camps and in different levels of development. So we really need to take like a grassroots approach in terms of addressing the problems that we have. So when you speak about resources, that is a tricky one, also considering, the issues that we've faced with colonialism to begin with. That is still in the process. People are still fighting for their land. People also, in the other hand, they're also lying to say that they've owned land and they might not have owned land. So these are some of the systematic problems that would sort of flesh out as part of our way or discourse in addressing certain problems in society. So thank you so much for that insightful contribution. I really appreciate that. So do we have any other person who wants to contribute and probably respond to this? I know ChatGPT is not a fan favorite of academics, but but I think this question somewhat touches on different aspects to say like we can't really run away from it. Maybe you can avoid it, but to some extent, maybe if you are a student or a lecturer, you would come across a student who have used the ChatGPT as part of their assignment or even research papers, you see, because I think some papers have been retracted from the use of ChatGPT because of the used ChatGPT. Even Meta AI. Okay, there's Meta AI. Okay, I had no idea. Thank you, Victoria. So a
Okay,
system. Oh, okay,
sorry,
proceed, yes.
sorry. At this point, we are running out of time, but we will try to cover as much content as possible. And I would contact the presenter. Maybe we can look at doing a second workshop if you're open to it, but we can discuss this privately. And I can set up a subsequent workshop
Oh,
if
fantastic.
you,
Thank you so much for that.
yeah, no worries,
Oh,
no worries.
all right. So I think we'll just try to rush this as quickly as possible. But I think we have somewhat emphasized that every project needs people who have a stake in its success, whether they're actively contributing or benefiting from it. Those people need to be identified. So the first step is to figure out who these people are, who is directly involved, and who will play a key role in making things happen. Could be the funder, as a typical example. So at the same time, it's important to think about who stands to gain from it. So we must not expect that people will just fall into our lap, and we must not really work in isolation as part of crafting the project. So not every outcome is positive for everyone. I think you might have realized that as you undertaking your study. So we need to be mindful of unintended consequences, because I know there are some um, findings that would somewhat cause conflict, or maybe they might be different, or maybe you might get critiqued for the methodology maybe that you would have used. So it's worth considering how people see the project from start to finish. See, so there's a need for a key understanding of different perspectives as part of building relationships as well as crafting your research. So building on the previous slide, I want to take a moment to sort of highlight an important point, which is the need to engage research with the society. And I'm not just saying it from a academic point, but I'm just really saying reaching out to people out there in the society. Because like I've mentioned, if you publish, maybe let's for example, an academic journal, or you public, I mean, English is fading away now. If you somewhat uh, publish your paper in an academic journal or present at an academic conference, chances are that academics will be part of your audience. And they might not necessarily have much of capabilities in terms of translating the recommendations that you probably would have raised to make an impact. So there's a strong need to somewhat diversify our approach in disseminating the results of our research. So I think too often we somewhat kept in a bubble. That's why people will say, academics, they are out of touch with reality. So disseminating our research project probably through workshops, teaching and learning, having government, as a typical example, government conferences would also help to, spread the message depending on what you are focused on. So, but obviously you have to know who your audience is, because you can't really take our research maybe to people who are not really within the sector, as a typical example. So it's all, well, I think once you have published your results, engaging your audience. So looking in terms of the activities and output that you intend to plan, I would say that it's not really enough to have a brilliant research. We must really think strategically about this to say, what is it that really stems out of this? So this somewhat prompts us to consider specific actions that we'll probably be taking as part of our as part of our findings. Like I've mentioned, maybe writing policy briefs, creating educational materials, or even converting that maybe into a social media post. You see, not necessarily LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably a good place to start, but also Facebook. I don't think I have a Facebook account, but Twitter as well. I think that way we would somewhat have a reach in terms of who we are targeting. I'm trying to rush as quickly as possible. Also, I think one thing we would need to somewhat check if our system is working is reflexibility. So reflexibility, which necessarily touches on monitoring, evaluation, as well as reflection. So in a way, creating a system to check whether you are achieving the intended objectives. Are you touching, the various stakeholders as you have intended? How is it going? Are you making an impact in a way? Because, like I said, it's not really about the findings in themselves, but how the findings would somewhat lead to, tangible impact. So if maybe, for example, have word of mouth feedback from people that you're presenting to, having surveys or interviews or even observation that can feed into your monitoring and evaluation framework. So think of this as a garden in a way, because you always check on it, right? To see if your flowers are coming out, and if weeds are popping out, and then you probably just throw them away. So this is somewhat like a summary of everything that you've done. So it really is a visual representation of research progress from its initial stage in terms of development all the way out through the impact that it intends to have on our society. I think if maybe, let's say, for example, you published a paper, I mean, not necessarily published a paper, because probably that would be, as a student, that would be like a proceeding step after you have collected your data, have written up your dissertation or thesis, and have that converted into an article. Maybe a news journal will probably maybe reach out to you, depending on their market, to say, yeah, this is what we found as part of your research. These are the findings. Maybe convert that into an article, a news outlet that can be, targeted to a wider audience. That is an add to in terms of diversifying your reach. Maybe perhaps you might be lucky and maybe get invited to present your findings, maybe at SABC or whatever. So these are the things that you really need to have in mind. But then again, it also depends on the type of research that you would have. I think I'm almost at the end. So what are the benefits of having a sustainable research project? I think being on media is probably one of them. But also, I mean, you gain reputation, I think, for starters. You really have an intrinsic, I'd say, ego, so to speak, about having contributed to sustainable development goals. It also contributes to you having a reputation as a typical example. You are able to quantify on investments, national agendas, to name just a few. I see that we're 6 minutes out of time, but just
Yes.
yeah, but I'm almost done.
No worries.
Uh,
Go for it. Go for
all
it.
right. Thanks. So also, I think having a sustainable research project would also help you to somewhat identify, have a specific niche in a way that will contribute to advancing development. Let me make this example again. We have the National Development Plan, and I've been looking at some of the reviews to say, like, how far are we in terms of achieving the goals that we have set in that plan? And they're not so good. And some of them, they're actually looking into various aspects such as, socio-economic development. And I think from not even doing research, you're able to tell that maybe we're not achieving those intended objectives. And we just 5 years in 5 years ahead. I mean, just left with 5 years to 2030, and we still have not maybe scratched the surface of what really goes on to that plan. Your research is a typical like your research might feed into that. It might make a contribution to say what went wrong as part um of our discourse in terms of trying to establish that sustainability. So with that being said, everyone, I actually wrote this when I keep on hearing that they say knowledge is power, but I say if you're able to know what to do with that knowledge, if it translates into tangible impacts, then that's where the real power lies. Because it's something to have information out there sitting online, and it's another to convert it into, you know, real world impact. So thank you, everyone. I don't know if we have any time for but question and answer, but I would love
Yes,
to hear your
I
thoughts.
think yeah, I can allow for a few questions, comments, thoughts. Um, all right. I, Manda, I have sent the evaluation form in the chat, but I'll send it again. Anybody else with a comment or question related to the presentation? Is there something you're unsure of or you would like re-explained?
Please, guys, please don't be shy. Just raise your critique. What needs to be improved?
Okay.
Dance.
If there
Do we have any?
We just have Caroline saying, thank you so much for this impactful session. Your quote will be added to my dissertation.
Don't
Leslie
forget to tag
says,
me.
thank you. Leslie says, thank you for the presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, guys. I wasn't looking to such comments because yeah, I was a bit underprepared, but I was just mostly relying on experience. I was mostly relying on experience, so I'm glad you enjoyed the talk.
We definitely did. I just want to take the time to thank you, Mr. Perfetto. I know I'm getting the name horribly wrong. I'm so sorry.
Not a problem.
I'm going to call you Mr. P. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. It's cool.
I just want to say thank you so much for your time, your effort, your assistance, and thank you for supporting the RCD unit. We really appreciate it. I want to thank all our attendees for availing yourself. We are trying to support the postgraduate students in every phase of your journey. That is why it is very important to fill out the survey form that I've posted so that we can also understand how we can better our offerings in the future and provide you with all the support that we can. Also, if you are unsure about our Moodle communities, let me start there. I who all knows about Ulink? With can can just react with a thumbs up. Ulink is central to the University of Johannesburg, right? So as soon as you log on to ULink, you're going to navigate to the Moodle tab. And when you click into that Moodle tab, then you will find all of the work. First, you will find the different communities in terms of masters and doctoral communities. And then when you click into a specific community, you can access then all workshop resources. So the recording will be uploaded there as well as the slides. However, if you are having any difficulty, please email us at RCD Inquiries and we can walk you through the process of getting enrolled into the community, and then thereafter you can explore the workshops for 2025 as well as our previous workshops. We are here to help you.
Oh,
So with
thank you
that,
so much.
with that being said, thank you everybody for attending. We really appreciate it and enjoy your Wednesday. We've got one more day and then Friday is a holiday. So enjoy.
Yay. All right, thanks everyone. Take care.